Hello and welcome to Democrats of Greater Tucson. My name is Larry Bodine. I'm the president and I will be your host today. And if you don't have a speaking role, go ahead and mute your microphone so we don't pick up all the background noise. We have a very interesting topic today. We've got David Lujan and Luci Messing on the program to talk about restoring the funding for Prop 208. So David, Luci, how are you? Good to see you. Let's get, we have a few announcements. So why don't we get started? How about you, Kathy? Tell us about membership.
All the best Democrats are members of the Democrats of Greater Tucson. Now, David Lujan, you're not quite yet a member. I'm sure it just was an oversight. But for only $20, you can be a member of the Democrats of Greater Tucson and hang out with all the cool kids. So whatever for the rest of you. Remember, if you don't want to do Act Blue, you can find the post office box to send your money to. And Steve Linder will go down and pick up the mail, and he will open up your check and deposit it to the Democrats of Greater Tucson. So if you're not yet a member, please join. If you are a member, thanks for joining. And we look forward to seeing all of you at our Drinking Democratically. Right, Larry? Back to you.
Absolutely. Let's turn to Christina Early to tell us a little bit more about Drinking Democratically.
Hi, everybody. In the chat, I put the link for registering for our Drinking Democratically happy hour. That is going to be this coming Wednesday, the 25th, from 4 to 6 p.m. at Brothers John's Beer, Bourbon, and Barbecue Restaurant on Stone Avenue. They have a great happy hour menu. You can check that out online if you'd like. There's more information in that registration link. If you don't want to worry about copying the registration link, you can also register through the DGT.org website. This is our 4th happy hour. It's been a lot of fun. Getting to talk with folks face to face. Last time we got a lot of petitions signed. I'm hoping that we'll see more people. We haven't had a lot register, so surprise us and show up on Wednesday at Brother John's from 4 to 6 p.m. Hope to see you there.
Super. Thanks very much for organizing that. How about Sandy Binion now? Tell us a bit about some of the great speakers you've lined up.
And thank you to David and Luci for speaking today. Next week, we have Daniel Hernandez, who is presently an Arizona State Representative, but is now announced his candidacy for CD2 because, as you know, the president's occupants have decided to retire. Following that, we're going to take a day off on Labor Day and encourage everybody to participate in whatever activities Labor has planned this year. And then on 13th of September, Aaron Lieberman, who is running for governor of Arizona, he's our 3rd candidate. Then the following week, we have Reginald Bolding, who is one of the 2 candidates that have announced so far for Arizona Secretary of State. So we've got some interesting people coming up, and I'm sure today's thing will be very interesting. So stay tuned.
Thanks very much, Sandy. I think the Democrats have some terrific candidates for 2022. I'm pretty optimistic for the congressional race and governor's race and Secretary of State. And I'm going to personally devote my efforts into flipping the legislature so that we don't have to worry about the bills that we're going to be talking about today. So the Arizona legislature in this recent session passed 3 bills that undercut the will of 1.7 million Arizonans who voted to pass Prop 208, which is the Invest in Education Act. And today, Invest in Arizona is circulating petitions that aim to block all 3 of these laws because they gut our state budget and they defund public education. I'll let David and Luci go a little bit more into detail about that. Luci is the chair of the Education Council of the Arizona Democratic Party, and she serves on the board of the Tanque Verde Democrats, and she's the AEA Retired Political Action Coordinator. David Lujan led the successful effort to pass Prop 208, the Invest in Ed ballot initiative, in 2020. David is the director of the Arizona Center for Economic Progress, and he's a former state senator and state House of Representatives member. And with that, let me turn the floor over to Luci and David. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Larry. You guys always hear from me because I'm always here. And I do have information to share if David doesn't necessarily cover that, but he is going to be very thorough, I'm sure. And we do want to be able to open it up for questions. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to David. I'm so grateful that he was able to join us today because he truly is the top guy regarding this issue. All yours, David.
Thank you, Luci. Hello, everybody. Glad to be with you all again. So I'll start with the referendum on the 3 bills. That's obviously related to the court decision that came out last week around Proposition 208. So after I talk about the referendum, I'll talk about the court decision and what that means for these referendum efforts, and then toss it back to Luci for to fill in anything that I miss, and then also happy to answer any questions that you may have too. So first of all, to start with why we are doing these referendums, let me back up to where we were before the legislative session started this year, back in January. And as we went into the legislative session this year, Arizona had a close to $2 billion revenue surplus that could be used for ongoing needs. So ongoing means things that are going to be recurring expenditures year after year, almost a $2 billion revenue surplus that could basically be used for investing in any other state needs that are out there. I've been around the state capitol for many years, and if you ask anybody else around the state capitol who's been there for a long time, many of them will tell you that they cannot recall a year when Arizona had a $2 billion revenue surplus. And a lot of that was due to what we've seen over the last year with the federal government, in particular, giving the states, including Arizona, lots of stimulus checks and other surplus stimulus packages that went to Arizona. For individuals, it meant a lot of people had more stimulus checks and other, there was boosts in unemployment, and all of those things get paid into state income taxes. Some people were not hurt as hard by the pandemic and the economic shutdown, particularly people in the upper middle class to higher incomes. And so what we also saw over the past year, even though many people were struggling, a lot of people were still doing pretty well, and they were going out and they were buying things. In particular, they were buying things online. And so that also created a huge surplus of revenue that the legislature had going into this session. And that was an opportunity, because if you've heard me speak before, or you probably know if you've lived in Arizona for any time, to have a $2 billion revenue surplus is unusual, and it's an opportunity to invest in the things that we have been cutting so much over the years. We had an opportunity going into this session, if the legislature and the governor chose to do so, to make up for all of those years of cuts to public education, to make up for all of those years to cuts to higher education. Over the past decade, our universities and community colleges have seen the largest cuts in the country compared to other states. We could have invested in our affordable housing. The Housing Trust Fund was completely decimated back in 2008 during the Great Recession. That funding has never been restored. We could have invested in childcare. Childcare funding for low-income families has been cut to the bone over the last decade. We have some of the lowest childcare subsidies in the country for low-income families. We could have invested in that. Kids Care, which is our children's health insurance program for low-income children. Arizona has the 4th lowest rate of coverage for children, health coverage in the country. And we could have invested in Kids Care and significantly increased by the thousands the number of children that had access to health coverage with just a $12 million annual investment. $12 million when you're talking about a $2 billion revenue surplus was very doable. So we didn't necessarily even have to pick like any of those individually. We could have done all of those things and still had revenue left over. That's how large a $2 billion revenue surplus is. It was an opportunity to invest in our future, an opportunity to make up for years and years of cutting. However, that is not what our legislature did. They basically gave the entire $2 billion revenue surplus away in the form of tax cuts. And these tax cuts are not tax cuts that are going to everyday Arizonans. 90% of the tax cuts go to the top 20% of the wealthiest Arizonans. If you are an Arizonan that makes $60,000 to $70,000, you're going to get an average tax cut from this package of $34 to $35. But if you are in the top 1% of Arizona's richest Arizonans, you're going to get more than $35,000 in annual tax cuts from this package. 57% of the tax cuts in this package go to just the top 1%. And so that is what happened this legislative session. Instead of giving and investing the revenue that we had, we gave it away in the form of tax cuts. And the bigger issue is those tax cuts they're almost impossible to reverse if we don't do these referendums, because it only takes a simple majority of the legislature to pass the tax cuts. All they needed was 31 out of 60 in the House and 31 out of 60 in the House and 16 out of 30 in the Senate, plus the governor's signature to pass these measures. And that's what they got, just the bare minimum. They got one vote above the majority. But to reverse those tax cuts later, or to raise revenue later, it takes a 2/3 vote of both chambers and the governor to reverse those tax cuts later. It has been virtually impossible to get that 2/3 majority since that provision went into place over 30 years ago. So even if we elect a Democratic legislature, both chambers Democratic, and we elect a Democratic governor in 2022, it's unlikely we're going to get a supermajority of Democrats in both chambers and a Democratic legislature, governor. So it will be, even with a Democratic legislature and governor, it'll be virtually impossible to reverse those tax cuts and raise revenue in the future. And so a lot of the work that you're doing to elect Democrats will be great, but their hands are basically going to be tied when they get elected, because they will have no revenue, and we will quite possibly be in a real revenue shortfall, because all those tax cuts are going to be given away. And if there's any sort of economic downturn in the future, the legislature that has to inherit this is going to have to deal with how do you fund state government, and they're basically their only choice is going to be to cut. So it's going to, even if you have Democratic candidates who are talking about investing in education and housing and childcare, these tax cuts are going to make it impossible for them to do that in the future. And so that's why these referendums are important, because the Arizona Constitution does give us one opportunity to be able to block these tax cuts, and that is through the power of referendum. And basically what that does is it says you have 90 days from the time the legislature ends its work for the year to go out and gather about 118,000 signatures from registered Arizona voters. And if we do that within those 90 days, and the deadline is September 28th, I believe, to turn in the signatures. If we do that, those 3 tax cut bills that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a second, all 3 of the tax cut bills that we are trying to refer will be immediately put on hold. They will not be allowed to go into effect this year as they're supposed to do. So if we get the signatures by September 28th and we turn them in and they're valid, immediately those laws are blocked until the November 2022 election. And so those bills are blocked. And then at the November election, the November general election next year, Arizona voters will have the opportunity to decide whether they want to vote to allow those tax cuts to go into effect. If they do, they would immediately be allowed to go into effect after the election. Or if Arizona voters say no, we will have successfully blocked all three of those tax cuts. And then for the new legislature that comes in 2023, they will then have that $2 billion revenue that is freed up from those tax cuts to do whatever they choose to do with that $2 billion. If you have a Democratic legislature and a Democratic governor, and they're coming into their work with a $2 billion revenue surplus, you can imagine the good things that could be done for the future of our state if that happens. And so that's what's at stake with these referendums. If we are not able to get the signatures, the tax cuts will go into effect on September 28th. And it will be almost impossible to reverse them later. And it will reduce state revenues by $2 billion every year, not just the 1 year, it's every year into the future. And so that is $2 billion, that could be invested in so many different things. So there's 3 bills that we are having to get signatures for. And why is it 3 bills? That's very much intentional. They could have very easily put all of these tax cut bills into one bill because they're related. But when they knew that we were getting ready to do a referendum, they intentionally split the bills into 3 separate bills because that forces us to go out and do 3 separate petitions for each one of them. So obviously it makes our work that much harder. And I'm sure probably all of you have been out and tried to get petitions. And so, when you ask a person to get 1 signature, that's hard. When you ask them to sign 2 things, that's even harder. When you ask them to sign 3, you're really pushing their patience sometimes. And so, but that's the challenge that the legislature and the governor intentionally put upon us. I think the good news is we are seeing that Arizonans are so fed up with these tax cut proposals that a lot of people are sticking around and signing all 3. And so we are hopeful we can do that. In terms of what the 3 bills are, so there's 3 different tax cut proposals. The first one is a flat tax. This is the big one. This is the biggest of the tax cuts. It's about $1.5 billion of that tax cut that I was talking about. Basically, Arizona right now has what are called marginal income tax rates, and that means the lower you are on the income scale, the lower percentage you pay in taxes. So the idea is the higher income you make, you pay a little bit higher percentage. This would say everybody pays 2.5% flat tax. It basically means if you're in the lower income, lower to middle, you're basically going to continue to pay about what you've been paying, because that's about what the effective tax rate is for most low and middle income Arizonans. This benefits, as I said, the wealthiest people, because they're the ones who don't pay that, and they're going to be, so this is a huge tax cut for them. That's one of the bills. The other 2 bills are direct attacks on Prop 208, which we passed last year, which are designed to raise more money for public education. One bill basically says that if you are a wealthy individual and you're going to be subject to that 3.5% tax that Prop 208 levies against you, it gives you 2 different ways to redirect your taxes so that you are bringing your taxable income down and avoiding the 3.5% surcharge. One is if you are an individual in estates, and wealthy families typically will do this. They put their wealth into an estate or trust and they draw down income, and it's a way to get tax benefits. But typically that has been taxed under the regular income tax rates in Arizona. they have created a new tax filing where people can basically file a different kind of form for their trusts and estates. And then also the other one is for if you get income from a business that you own. Typically, if you're a sole proprietor or you're a partnership, you pay for that out of your individual income tax. They have created a separate kind of tax filing so that your trusts, your estates, and your business income, you fill out a different form. They pay the same amount of tax as before, but basically it takes it out of the individual income tax and it allows them to avoid the 3.5% surcharge. The proponents of this said, well, this is just to do what the supporters of Prop 208 said all along, and that is to make sure that businesses are not going to be taxed. Let me just reiterate what I said during the campaign and what I will say now. Not one single business will be taxed under Proposition 208. Proposition 208 only taxes wealthy individuals. Now, it's true that some of those wealthy individuals get some of their income from businesses that they own, but this does not tax the business itself. And most mom and pop businesses, most small businesses in Arizona do not make anywhere near the take-home income that would be enough to trigger Prop 208. The average income for a small business owner in Arizona is $48,000 a year. This bill that we are trying to do a referendum is simply one that will target and benefit the richest 1%. And so that's the second bill. The third bill is also designed to get around Prop 208. Prop 208, again, levies a 3.5% surcharge on the wealthiest Arizonans. This third bill says nobody in Arizona, even if you're in that top bracket, will have to pay more than 4.5%. And basically what it says is to those wealthy people, if they're going to have to pay the 3.5% surcharge, it says we're going to pay for that out of the state general fund. We're going to basically cover your tax bill to the wealthy people. We're going to pay for it out of the general fund and take away money that could otherwise be used to invest in healthcare and childcare and housing and other things, just so that the wealthy people don't have to pay that 3.5% surcharge. So there's that bill. By the way, the bill that I talked about before, the business exception and for trusts and estates, that bill will reduce the revenue that can be raised by Prop 208 by about $300 to $400 million a year. So Prop 208, when it goes into effect, will raise about $950 million a year. And so if that bill that I talked about goes into effect, it will reduce it by about $350 to maybe even $400 million a year. So it's really important to go out and get signatures on all three to stop them. So your next question is, well, there was this Supreme Court decision last week that people are saying is going to strike down Prop 208. So let me just say, I am one that doesn't want to give false hopes, but I think the reports of the demise of Prop 208 were very much premature. After the decision has come out, I think we were all kind of taken back and we thought there wasn't much hope. I am very hopeful that Prop 208 will be just fine after it goes back to the trial court. We still have a big issue as a state as it relates to the expenditure cap, and I can talk about that in a moment. But I think even if we exceed the expenditure cap, Prop 208 is going to be just fine and we'll be able to move forward. And I can talk a little bit more about that, but I think Prop 208 can survive and will survive. And that's why it's important to continue with the referendum on all three measures. Because I think it's, and even if for some reason Prop 208 gets struck down, it's important to continue all three because then those wealthy individuals are still going to get the tax breaks that are the additional tax breaks, even though Prop 208 no longer exists. They're still going to get these big tax breaks that they don't even need especially if Prop 208 is not in existence, but yet they will get them anyway. And so, and it will reduce our revenues. And if Prop 208 was to be struck down, with that $2 billion revenue surplus, we could fully fund Prop 208 into the future out of the general fund without having to do any other tax increases and still have money, significant amount of money left over to invest in other things if we had that $2 billion. So that's why, but if we let it all go in tax cuts, we'll never have that option to us again. So that's why the referendums are so critically important. I think I'll stop there and just see if there's questions, because that's kind of the basics of the Prop 208, the referendums. I will, though, talk about the school expenditure cap later. I think that's kind of a separate issue, but it's a huge issue if you want me to talk about that in the questions. But I'll just stop there and see if Luci wants to add anything to what I just added.
Here's the only other things I want to add. We are down to 36 days. 36 days to get this done. And I am in awe, to be honest, of the work that we have done here in Pima County, because I think we're always the best, right, David?
Yes.
We always get it done here, and you guys have risen to the occasion once again, and it's great to see, and I appreciate it. But we can't stop, and we can't give up. We have 36 days to get this done. And so I do want to emphasize that. And you know where you can find these petitions. We've been putting the information out there. More and more people are having pop-up petition drives in parks and at libraries. And we do have paid circulators that are helping us. And they really are out there helping. That's why I think we have such a great chance of making sure that we're going to get the 118,000 valid signatures, because we're going to try and come in at, I think, 50,000 more than we need, and we're going to get there. We just can't let up. It's a short window, and we have to stop, especially the flat tax. The flat tax is one of the most concerned to me, because that would be devastating to the entire budget. And I don't know if David wants to mention anything about this experiment that was tried in Kansas.
Yeah, happy to. I mean, Governor Ducey has said, even when he was first campaigning for office, that his goal is to reduce the income tax to as close to zero as possible. Well, if this goes through, will have pretty much accomplished that goal. It was also the goal of the governor of Kansas back in 2012. Their economy was doing okay too when they first passed that tax, but it absolutely devastated it once they did those tax cuts. They then they recognized that they had lost a lot of revenue. They then had to have huge cuts to their public education system, to healthcare. It almost just shut them down as a state, basically. And so everybody talks about the failed Kansas experiment from that flat tax. And that's essentially what we are about to repeat. You would think if another state had passed something like that and had such terrible consequences that you would learn and not want to do it. But we went full bore and have passed something very similar.
All right, we have a question from Susie Anderson. Go ahead, Susie.
So good to have you here and explain all of this. The more details, the better, because it's a very complex issue. Now, what the Supreme Court said about the Constitution, what is in the Constitution that limits spending for education? Do you have that answer, David?
I do. Yeah. So that was what I was referring to. And so this is a bigger issue, regardless of what happens with 208. This is a bigger issue that we should all be aware of, and it's going to impact our public schools every year going forward. And here's what it is. Back in 1980, farmers in Arizona were concerned that we were spending too much on public education, and it was causing their property taxes to go up. So it was mainly led by farmers. They organized a measure to put on the ballot in 1980 to amend the state constitution that basically said whatever we were spending at that time in 1979, 1980, that should be the cap going forward for Arizona, and we should never go above that cap, except in adjusting it for inflation and student population. But basically, the basic level of what we were funding our schools at in 1979, that was our cap, and that was passed by the voters, and it's now in our state constitution. And we public schools have exceeded that cap 2 different times. Once in 2002, right after Prop 301 was passed. And so, Prop 301 is the education sales tax. You pay, 0.4 cents of every sales tax that goes to public schools. When voters passed that in 2000, that triggered us exceeding the expenditure cap. So what the Constitution says is that if schools go over that cap, the state legislature can override it on a year-by-year basis with a 2/3 vote of both chambers. And so the legislature overrode it that year, but then the next year they went back to the ballot for Prop 301, and voters said, any revenue raised by Prop 301 is exempt and doesn't count towards that expenditure cap. And so, but that was one of 2 times when we have exceeded the expenditure cap. The last time was when I was in the legislature in 2007. We also exceeded the expenditure cap. And so the legislature then also did a 2/3 vote to override it for that year. We haven't really hit the cap in years after that because the Great Recession hit. And as you know, we had the biggest cuts in the country to public education. So it wasn't a big issue. But as some of that funding has been restored and we're getting new programs, we've gotten closer and closer. And now also, remember I said that voters exempted Prop 301 back in 2000. Well, that exemption only lasted until this year. It expired on June 30th. So now all the revenue from Prop 301 starting July 1st is also counting towards the cap. So even if Prop 208 was not even in the picture, we will hit the cap this year and we will hit it every year, most likely going forward, which means school districts are not going to be able to spend any of this new funding that's coming through or not going to be able to go above it. So rather than having to go to the legislature every year and ask them to override, which is a problem, as you can imagine, the issue is somebody at some point is going to have to go back to the ballot and either do away with that spending cap or raise it significantly so it's not tied to 1980 levels. The way we educate students is much different than it was in the 1980s. There's a lot more costs, a lot more, and so it's not working for modern day education. And so we either have to raise it significantly, or better yet, I think, because in a state that is 48th in the country in per pupil funding, the fact that we are at our spending cap on public education, I think is a real problem for where we want to go as a future of the state. If this is the best we're ever going to get. And so even regardless of what happens with Prop 208, this is an issue that we all have to deal with going forward. That being said, even though we're likely going to hit the cap next year, when it comes to the Supreme Court decision last week, let me just say that their decision was based on kind of, they don't quite get how the whole process works should you hit the revenue cap. And I think that's what's going to come out once we go to the trial court. And I think you're going to see, I think it's pretty clear that Prop 208 dollars can be used in their entirety, even if we hit the expenditure cap, as you'll probably learn in the coming weeks. And so that's why I'm feeling good about Prop 208. But still, we've got this bigger issue when it comes to the spending cap that we have to deal with.
Okay, we've got a question from Stephen Linder. Go right ahead.
Hi, yeah, for those of us who have petitions out, we've had some conversations. Luci had mentioned calling some petitions in early, even if they're unfinished, to see how we're doing. So can you give me, maybe, I don't know if you want to say, has there been a count as to how we're doing so far and whether or not we want to get these petitions in now and then, see how we're doing, or should we just keep going with the petitions we have and wait till the end?
Yeah, thank you. I would say if you have petitions out that are full, definitely turn them in, because we would like, that helps us to kind of gauge where we are. I think there's a lot of different organizations that are out collecting. And so we have general senses of what's been turned in. But the hard part is, and one of our partners in the referendum is Save Our Schools Arizona, which, as you know, did the last successful referendum 2 years ago to stop the voucher law from going into effect. So they know how this is done. They've been successful at it. And one of the things that they have said often and that we can expect in this referendum is that with a referendum effort, people tend to hang on to the petitions until almost the last minute. That's what happened with them a couple of years ago with the vouchers, because you have such a short amount of time. And so although we are kind of tracking and seeing what's been turned in, the reality is we are not going to know until the last few days, and when people really start to turn them in mass. And so, but to the extent people can do it now, we would encourage you to do that. But we get that people, it's a short time, so they're going to thankfully continue to try and get as many signatures as they possibly can, which is good too. But that puts us in a stressful situation, and we just have to kind of wait until the end, and hopefully, everybody turns things in. But I think we feel good. We also have some paid signature efforts that are out there that'll help to boost and complement what's going on a volunteer effort. But getting a high volunteer signature number is important. I know this from the 208 experience, because volunteers tend to be much more reliable in terms of their signatures, getting them from registered voters, making sure they follow all the rules. So the higher percentage we can get from volunteers, the better chance we have to withstand challenges later. So,
and to that point, I checked in a whole big box of petitions because the QR code hadn't been used on them. So I was inputting them from Pima County, and they were done so well. I was so happy because this is our third time. So people sort of have it down, and I was glad to see how accurate, how nice and straight all the signatures were in the lines, because we are held to strict compliance. So I'm very pleased about that. And one of the things that David said about our concern for people hanging them on too long, it would be great if you would plan, if you have a petition, to turn them in about a week ahead of time, and you will hear from us. And anybody who got petitions from me, or who I know you have petitions, I'm going to be tracking you down, and that I'm going to be getting those petitions and making sure they get turned in. And we just, again, can't thank you enough for your efforts.
Yeah, let me throw in the fact that the Pima County Democratic Party is holding training sessions on circulating petitions, and then a circulation signature drive every Sunday. Starts at 4 o'clock, and the canvassing continues until 6. So if you're looking for a place to pick up signatures and circulate them, the county headquarters is a place you can go. Let me turn to George McGooey from the Green Valley Democrats. George, go ahead.
Larry, I want to invite everybody down to Green Valley on September the 12th. We are having a petition palooza. We know it's late, so Luci, we will be in touch with you on that Monday morning with several boxes full. Come on down, take a leisure Sunday drive. We're going to be there from 10 to 2. You can stop in at the Tasty Freeze going home and have a fun drive going back. We know it's going to be probably one of the latest petition drives in the area. So if you have somebody that hasn't signed some, send them our way. But yes, David and Luci, we will be in touch. Thank you very much.
David, I have a legal question. I know that the Arizona Constitution provides that the legislature cannot override a referendum that's passed by the voters in Arizona, and that they can only pass laws that further the intention of the referendum. And yet it appears that the legislature did exactly that. They completely overrode Prop 208. Do you see that as a legal problem for the legislature, or a grounds to overturn all these 3 tax bills?
Yes, good question. So for, in particular, 1783, that we feel that very much overrides the will of the voters. We have a Voter Protection Act, as you mentioned, that prohibits the legislature from passing legislation that contradicts what the voters have passed. So in addition to these referendums, we have also filed a legal lawsuit alleging that 1783 violates the Voter Protection Act. And so that is just filed a couple of weeks ago. It'll take a little while to wind its way through the courts. I think we feel good about our legal position there. But we want to still, move forward on the referendums. Don't let that, distract you from going out and getting signatures, because we all know that our legal system can be unpredictable at times. And so we don't want to just rely on the courts. We want to make sure that we are doing this. And if the courts find and agree with us that it does violate the Voter Protection Act, even if we were to go out and get the signatures to do the referendum, it would basically nullify the need for the referendum. They would, for that particular bill, they would basically take that off the ballot in 22 because we will have struck it down through the courts. So we are trying to attack these on all possible fronts. But yes, I think it very well could violate the Voter Protection Act.
And I want to make a comment that the individual, the attorney that is representing us, is top notch. She's amazing, and she has done a good job in taking on these issues. So we're very happy to have her representing us in this lawsuit.
Yep.
Luci, is that Rupali Desai or someone else?
It is Rupali.
Yeah, she's fantastic. I think you're in good hands.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got a couple of more questions. Susie Anderson, go right ahead.
Well, this is just a comment to let you know that I will have the 3 positions on Invest in Arizona at Drinking Democratically. So bring your friends who have not signed to Drinking Democratically at Brother John's Bourbon, Beer, and Barbecue on Wednesday, the 25th, between 4 and 6. We'll have some fun and get some hard work done.
Absolutely. Thank you. Sandy Sauce, you have a question. Tell us what's on your mind.
In the reference to the $2 billion per year, is that the amount? Because what part of that is due to the American Rescue Plan, all kinds of one-time, hopefully one-time aid when COVID goes away, these funds go away. So what's the continuing piece of that $2 billion?
Thank you. That's a really good question. And that is actually a big unknown. So according to the Nonpartisan Joint Legislative Budget Committee, they estimate that $2 billion is what we can count on an ongoing basis. There's also another almost $2 billion on a one-time basis that they said was, so a total of $4 billion. But they said about $2 billion could be counted on from a year to year, recognizing that some of that money came from the feds. But that's a big unknown. We had never have seen the kind of federal stimulus and frankly, the kind of year we saw last year. It was a year unlike any other economically. And so we don't know what it's going to be like next year. But the tax cuts, if they go through, will be passed and that revenue will be given away. And so let's say it's just a $1 billion ongoing revenue surplus, but we've already passed $2 billion in tax cuts. We now have the year after that, we've got a $1 billion hole. And after that. And so that's another reason of why to pursue these referendums, because they were based on this $2 billion revenue surplus, which nobody had seen that size before. If we had done investments instead of tax cuts, we all know the legislature can very easily cut investments. But like I said, they can't reverse tax cuts once they go into effect. So that's just another reason why.
David and Luci, I'm curious about what sort of opposition you expect to get to your efforts. Is it going to be the Goldwater Institute, Americans for Prosperity, maybe the Cyber Ninjas? What sort of opposition do your efforts face?
All the usual suspects. Yes, all those people you mentioned, the Arizona Chamber of Commerce, all the people that opposed 208, that opposed the minimum wage back in 2016, that oppose just about anything that cuts taxes. They will be putting as much money as they possibly can in efforts. And I think that's what should, give people hope in terms of, look at where we are. This Prop 208 was the second attempt to try and get this on the ballot. You remember we did this in 2018. We got the signatures. We got knocked down by the Supreme Court, but we said we're coming right back, and we came back the next year. We introduced Prop 208. 2 weeks later, the pandemic hit, everything shut down. People said we couldn't get the signatures. We got the signatures. We got on the ballot. Judge Corey at the trial court knocked us down. Everyone said it was dead. 2 weeks later, the Supreme Court, because we knew we had the law on our side and the Supreme Court couldn't do anything else about it, they put us back on the ballot. We got on the ballot. We had $20 million spent against us in last year's election. We had the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, all these national publications, Arizona Republic, the governor, all come out against it. Everybody said you cannot raise taxes at the ballot in Arizona when all those people are against it. It's never happened before. We did it. It passed. We knew that they were going to challenge us as soon as they passed. They challenged us. We got back in court. Last week's decision, I know looks bad, but hold on. I think we're going to survive this. And if it survives next week, that's it. It's on the ballot. It's going to be good. And so think about but then we have to get the referendums, because that's the last attack. If we can do that, the narrative in 6 months is going to be pretty amazing for what we have accomplished in Arizona, because we will have in Arizona, where they said it can never be done, despite all of that stuff that was thrown against us, we will have done it. We will have passed Prop 208. We will have withstand every challenge that was thrown at us. So we're that close. We are that close. We just got to get these signatures, and I think, make the case next November to make sure that they reject those tax cuts. And by the way, the polling is overwhelmingly in our favor, that if we can get these on the ballots, the voters will reject them. So, I know it seems like we are doing this over and over again. We do, but we are just about, I think, to that top. And then, if we can elect the legislature, and we're just there for that, we are so close to everything we want. So it's not giving up now when it's as hard as it seems. We just got to push a little bit more. And I think we are that close to really, making the point that we can do this. So.
And speaking of polling, when we first started Prop 208, it polled very high. And we felt that if we got it to the ballot, it was going to pass. But when they came in with millions and millions of dollars to go against us, that polling started to drop a little bit. But we worked extremely hard in having those conversations with voters so that they understood. And we knew that the voters of Arizona support public education. We know that. And so, but just as a reference, the Prop 208 passed by almost 52%. And so it was much closer than we had hoped it would be, but that was because of the amount of money and the attacks at the last minute to try to get voters to be swayed against voting for it. The good thing is that it was a record year for getting Democrats out to vote. And because of our high turnout, we did such a good job in getting our voters out that we were able to accomplish this task. And it gives us hope. Like David says, we think we can do this, and we need your help because we are almost there.
Luci and David, I wonder if you can tell me when we're taking our petitions around and we're knocking on somebody's door, what is the most persuasive argument in favor of these referenda? What's the one thing that's really going to connect with registered voters?
I think all three are just huge tax giveaways to the richest Arizonans. And just say, the legislature just passed three huge tax cuts that are going to give away billions in dollars of revenue that we could be investing in our public schools. And they gave them away in tax cuts to the rich. It's going to give the rich an average tax cut of $35,000 a year. Whereas if you're an Arizonan making under $80,000, you're going to get $35. Do you think that's fair? And that's our future that they are giving away in the form of these tax cuts. And so that's the polling that Luci was talking about. People, when you tell them that, they're on our side. People are angry about these tax cuts having been passed. It's not just Democrats, it's independents, it's Republicans even, are supportive of doing away with these tax cuts. So we just got to go out there and make the pitch.
And you might want to include the words, we just want people to pay their fair share for the things that they benefit from in our state. We don't want people who already have enough to then not participate in making our state as strong and economically healthy as possible.
I want to turn it back over to you, Luci and David. I wonder if you can wrap up our meeting today. We're all solid Democrats here. Tell us what we should do next. Where should we go, and how do we proceed from here?
Yeah, I'll let Luci take that because she's on the ground there in Tucson, so she can probably give you the best advice. But thank you for letting me join you today. I look forward to coming back.
Thanks so much for being here, David. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, David. And as you've heard me say in the past, yes, petitions are at Pima Dems where you can sign or pick up. They're also at the Tucson Education Association office, Monday through Thursday from 1 to 5, and on Saturdays 9 to 1. We might increase the hours on Saturdays in the next couple weeks. We're waiting to see on that. And they are also available for those of you who live up north at the AEA Southern Region office off of Oracle and Ina, most days, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. There's that help all around. I've given this website in the past. It's investinarizonanow.com. And that's where you can go and get information. And it has all kinds of places that you can direct any family or friends who haven't signed yet. And then basically it's one of those times where every time you're out and about, you're meeting anyone, you've got your petitions with you, you've asked them if they've already signed. I have petitions at my home. People come to my house to pick up petitions. I mail out petitions. So we're getting out there. We just need to reach more people who possibly haven't signed or who are not aware. And that's where you all come in, because you touch all those people out there as far as your friends and family, and make sure every single family member, every single friend is on board.
Thank you so much, Luci and David, for coming to our meeting today to talk about this incredibly important issue. We thank you for all your efforts and all the wonderful work you're doing. And I hope this meeting causes a lot of people to pile out and get some petitions and get some signatures, because it's going to make a difference in whether or not our new Democratic legislature, which I hope will be elected, is going to have a $2 billion surplus. And with that, I'm going to call the meeting to a close. So thank you all for attending. Thank you for our speakers. And we look forward to seeing you at our next DGT meeting. Bye-bye now.